This is the one a lot of you have been waiting for. It's the UWF, Bill Watts, and Mid-South Wrestling on. What's that in the... Oh, no. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Where's my show? We are back. Welcome to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. My name is Bob Smith. I hope you remember me from my days at Pro Wrestling Illustrated and WCW and WOW Magazine and Wrestling's Main Event and Inside Wrestling and The Wrestler. If I listed all the magazines I've written for, the show would be over in an hour. I'm not even kidding. And I am so happy because one of my favorite guests, I'm going to call him my co-host for the night, and I have him here at the beginning of the show because I want him to feel welcome. He's a wrestling expert. He's part of the Wrestler Weekly Bunch, which I really admire and really enjoy. It's Mike Leotis. He's back for, I don't know, the 80th time or something like that. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing good, Bob. How are you?
Glad to have you back here, man. It's and happy end of the year, whatever it is, wherever we're heading for. As we tape this, we're a few days ahead of Halloween.
Yeah, always love the fall season. So excited to be here and talk some wrestling. So
well, I understand you have a semi-tragic Halloween accident here. Is that right?
Pumpkin carving accident. So I feel like I'm going to almost lost a finger. Thankfully, the digit is still attached, but I feel like I can get some mileage out of this, like Buck Robley or Iron Mike Sharp, and wear this for the next 5 years and utilize it. So I might load this thing up once this is healed. So
fans, you can't see it, but Mike has more gauze on his finger than the Rockettes, so it's pretty good. Nice job, man. So anyway, we're here. We're going to talk about the Mid-South and UWF era. Is that a good way to put it, Mike?
I think so.
I think so too. It was a really interesting. And not as long as it felt like in history. When I think of those two federations, I think of that being like a 10-year thing. It wasn't even close to that.
No.
But they really made an impact, didn't they?
Yeah, it was, you always hear WWE, they used to, the longest weekly episodic running. But, man, wrestling's been episodic for a long time. And to me, there was hardly in the 80s a better promotion at that than Mid-South.
In my experience watching it, I have to agree. It was a very, very strong promotion, and they would throw the kitchen sink at you, and we're going to discuss that in just a couple of minutes. First, we got some commercial announcements to make, and then we're going to come back. Go to Mid-South. We'll be right back. Well, it's sort of kind of been in the news lately. We want you to know all about it. Recently, the Outdated Wrestling Hour podcast with Bob Smith has joined the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. I'm really glad to be part of this team, and you can hear the podcast virtually anywhere the podcasts are offered. Such great shows like the Wrestling Memory Grenade, Regional Wrestling, is the Wrestling Stoop with Bob Rube. Gene Jackson's another great host. You can hear him on the Retro Wrestling Review, which looks back at the classic days of USWA, and the brand new show, Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert, featuring, Doug Gilbert, one of the great Memphis wrestlers of all time. Also on the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, Dave Dynasty and his long-standing hit podcast, Wrestling Nostalgia, featuring an A-list bunch of professional wrestlers you never know who you're going to hear speaking with Dave. And of course, a serious bent on the WWA, and I love that. There's DG's Puro Wrestling Academy. Join host Dan Giannetti as they travel back in time to discuss the history of wrestling in Japan. through the decades, not just recently. You're going to want to check out that show. Monday Warfare, Raw versus Nitro, looks at, well, the classic Monday Night Wrestling Wars. The Other Ship podcast describes itself as a pop culture podcast with a pro wrestling lean. Join a rotating group of co-hosts as they talk movies, sports, TV, food, and of course, wrestling. How can you beat that? And they got a whole mess of great special guests, too. Also on the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, you're going to want to check out The Captain's Corner, GrappleCon, TR Shocks the World, WCNN News, and a whole lot more. You'll never know what you're going to hear on the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Well, how do you find all this stuff, right? Simple. Start out by just logging on to WrestleCopia.com. And let them take you on that ride, baby. To pro wrestling old and new. Hey guys, I've got some breaking news on the Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert podcast on the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. It's now called, now dig this, Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. That's right, there's two major stars on that podcast every single week going forward. So be sure to check that one out. All right, we are back. And Mike, you seem to me to be the type of wrestling aficionado who goes from, like the last time I had you on, I think we talked about Portland. Is that
Portland? Yeah.
And now we're talking about Mid-South. Are you the type that kind of like wrestle binges, as it were? Do you kind of find a federation, just go through its history and try to do it in chronological order? Because I know he did that I did it myself a couple of years ago with the WWA out of Indianapolis. Are you doing that now with Mid-South?
Yeah. So, it's funny. I go on these, I feel like a certain territory. Portland has been my mainstay go-to because I just really fell in love with it. But then Mid-South, I grew up, watching the last days of the UWF, that year or two where even though, it was a last-ditch effort at this national promotion, it was just a hot product, right? And then, and now I've kind of gotten into more of the tri-states, Leroy McGurk ish kind of era. And even then, when they were tri-states wrestling, in the little TV studio, and then they moved over to the Irish McNeil Boys Club there in Shreveport, Louisiana. Just such a great feel, such a great energy to the show. And I'm sure we'll talk about this. I credit Bill Watts a lot with that. But yeah, I get into these, like you said, these binges where I did Southwest Championship Wrestling, World Class I've done. For me, growing up as a kid in the late 80s and early 90s in New York, it was, Hulkamania and, what NWA and what later became WCW. But for me, the draw was always what I didn't get to see as a youngin'. So Georgia and Central States and all these things now, thank you to digital video. I started as a tape trader very, very young, and I would send people all the modern stuff that I had for the territorial stuff. And Mid-South was always a favorite.
You know what? I'm looking back through my notes here, and one thought keeps creeping up in my mind in about wrestling history, in that a good studio show could fill an arena.
Oh, yeah.
And if the WWF did any one thing, it was convincing people that you couldn't run just a little studio show. It has to be in a big arena with big fancy lights and explosions and music. That's not always the case. I mean, even the Sheik would fill the Cowboy after doing his little studio show in Detroit. And, the NWF that which was very similar to the Sheik's promotion in Cleveland, would do the same thing for Ron Martinez and Pedro Martinez. And Memphis, I rest my case.
Oh, yeah.
They did it for decades there. They didn't need to although they did tape some matches at the Mid-South for later viewing, but it was following along in a feud usually, as opposed to showing the matches just to show the matches.
Absolutely.
That was the difference in the psychology in Memphis.
Absolutely. And I think, like you said, these big glitzy, well-lit arena, and they look great. I mean, you look back at an episode of like WWF Superstars from 1986 or 87. I mean, and it is just wild looking, how high tech it became. And that's wonderful. But now what you have is, especially in modern wrestling, all the arenas look the same.
Yeah.
Everything looks exactly the same. There's no character to it. There's no, unless they do a stadium show, there's a little character,
Mhm.
but the studios or the little arenas, that Irish McNeil Boys Club in Shreveport is this little dumpy thing, but it was a great venue for wrestling. It had a great look. Look at the Sportatorium, even the one in Tampa, the Tampa Sportatorium. You go through these little things and they had character. The rings didn't look the same. I was talking to my cohort, Scotty Richardson at Wrestle Weekly. And I said, I miss the character of the old rings. Now they all look the same. It's black ropes or white ropes and all the same. I mean, you had buckles being held on by duct tape.
Oh yeah, well Memphis was like that too. And now you look at WWE. There's advertising on the skirts,
on the ring, yeah,
and the ring itself. There's advertising on the turnbuckle pads.
yeah.
Which, by the way, nobody uses anymore. I miss the days when you'd ram somebody's head in those things. I love that, and they don't do it anymore. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I saw like a nice 10 spot in the corner.
No, not just that. Just the head into the turnbuckle.
Oh yeah, head into the buckle.
But they seem to have stopped doing it. There's just some moves they just don't do anymore, and I don't understand why not.
Yeah, I think you know what I guess things always evolve, but it's just kind of like how like a DDT is not like a finisher anymore. The DDT
Oh god,
was
just like a polite greeting. Yeah.
It was the most devastating move. Jake Roberts hit that, and you talk about Mid-South. I mean, he hit that move. And I mean, the whole place went nuts. I mean, it turned him babyface because the move was so over. And you talk about the angle, right? He's feuding with Dick Slater, and there he is with Dark Journey and Dick Slater, and they blind him, and Jake not looking, and DDT's Dark Journey, and that place went absolutely bonkers. There's just moments like that I just feel like can't be manufactured today. It was just so real. There was just such realism about it. And just the emotions, of that you're feeling all these things, and it's this unexpected moment. And, Dark Journey interfered in so many matches, and you're like, oh, well, she finally got hers,
Right,
so it was an interesting time. But that move was, I mean, my gosh, it was devastating.
As you speak, I'm listening to your words, and a show concept just popped into my mind: the greatest interviews in wrestling history. I haven't even thought of this yet. Just the people who you could hand a microphone to or put them in front of a camera.
Yep.
And Jake Roberts is way up there.
Oh yeah,
way up. Talk about talking people in the building. Even then, he didn't need a handler, although he did have them.
Oh yeah,
he didn't need anybody to speak for him. He was, he was like a sadistic Sam Elliott.
Yeah. Like Jake just got it. You know what I mean? He knew, especially in the 80s when it was the screaming, yelling type promos. Jake talked in his promos. And there was, even when he was a good guy, so to speak, there was this deviousness about Jake that really was that snake. He was a snake, His character was slimy and, you know what I mean, and sneaky, and could just sneak up on you and bite you with that DDT at any point in time. And he wanted you to know it. And so, yeah, Jake Roberts, forget it. I mean, and for some reason, I feel like maybe because of his substance use issues and the different things, I just feel doesn't get his due the way that he, deserves to.
But you know what I really like? I see him with his wife on Facebook, and I'm so happy for them.
Yeah.
They look happier than they've ever, don't they? They look happier than they've ever been. And from all accounts, he's the coolest guy.
Yeah.
And he's doing well. He's real. And he's shockingly humble. And some heels are so good at being heels, you don't believe it when you find out they're really cool guys.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, I have met so many heels that once you sit down and talk to them, it's like, you're nothing like your character. It's like, I know. That's what I do.
Yeah. It's incredible, but Jake's kind of started out right as a journeyman, and then when, had some things in Florida with Kevin Sullivan. He really picked up some things there and went to Texas, and did some things there. And boy, really came into his own, I felt like in Mid-South. I mean,
I do. Georgia. I think that was, you're right. That was the starting the ascent. I absolutely agree with that.
that's where that Jake, he was larger than life, and he was, again, he had that thin frame that just fit what he did so well, and the way that he moved and his mannerisms. And I think that's one of the great things about, you look at like a territory at Mid-South, everything had a reason, and that's what made those territories great. Everything they did meant something. Where today it's, and again, I don't mean to dump on just today's wrestling, but I just mean today it's moves. I miss when every little thing meant something.
And the angles were way more subtle, but
Yeah.
they usually had a huge payoff.
Oh yeah.
Like the JYD blinding.
Oh yeah.
Like you said, the Dark Journey stuff, anything having to do with Steve Williams, it was just like, they knew how to pace a show. And the promoters, there's a couple involved there. There was Bill Watts, of course. Leroy McGurk in the beginning.
Leroy McGurk, yep. And then him and Watts, there was a little bit of a rift there that happened, and that was kind of like the birth into Mid-South, and Leroy was kind of out at that point. And again, guys who did things that they're remembered for on bigger stages later. But I argue that the stuff that they did in the territories was their finer work. Ernie Ladd was about to wrestle Mr. Wrestling 2, and he had weeks earlier taken out Paul Orndorff. And he gets in and he tacks 2 before the bell, and 2 doesn't even get his robe off. Well, before you know it, 2 starts flipping him around the ring and back body drops him and is hitting all these moves, and he finally gets his robe off and he unmasks, and it's Paul Orndorff underneath the mask. And the crowd just eats it up, and he is just throwing Ladd all over. And just, again, like an angle like that, it was just so good. It was just like, Ladd thinking he got the better of this guy now. The fans are wanting to see Ernie get it. He took out Paul Orndorff. He took out Paul's brother, Terry Orndorff. There's a name that not a lot of folks probably remember. And here he is getting his comeuppance, and he doesn't even know it,
Really cool. And here's the big thing about those days. In Louisiana, which isn't the most populous state in the world, they were drawing crowds of 22,000, 30,000, 17,000. That's impossible.
They were working the Superdome once a month.
Yeah,
it was incredible.
Superdome.
Yeah.
With that population base. I mean, that means you had a large, like Memphis, they had a large percentage of area citizens that were going and enjoying the show either on television or live. And who was drawn like that back then? Not very many people.
No. And
what years are we talking about there? We got to be talking right at least 80 to 83, right? At least 83, maybe 84. Right. We're talking, that early 80s period.
Maybe late 70s, early 80s,
And it was actually pre-expansion.
Yeah.
Right on the cusp. Yeah.
Right on the cusp. And it's, well, and again, they had bankable stars. The Junkyard Dog was a cultural icon in Louisiana. I mean, and again, I think it just goes to show you that wrestling is not always about the moves that happen in the ring, particularly the moves. It is about the wins and the losses. It is about the outcomes of what happens. But JYD is never going to be accused of being Luthez. However, man, he would come out, and that Another One Bites the Dust by Queen, right? And he would come out and he'd shake his knees and he'd do that dance, and people just ate it up, and you loved it. You loved the JYD. You wanted to see him get down on his knees and hit those headbutts and no sell the head into the buckle and just all that stuff. I mean, he was a larger than life character, and I think a lot of people, and again, the WWE would have you believe that they created stadium wrestling and big arena wrestling, and that they were the ones that created characters. And I mean, man, JYD, you might be hard pressed to find a better character ever in wrestling.
WWE Junkyard Dog was Diet Junkyard Dog.
Yes.
The real Junkyard Dog was in the Mid-South and in the UWF, because I'll tell you what, he spoke to the region there.
Yeah.
He spoke to the populace of that region, nobody else. and he hit them harder and more realistically, especially when he had that blind angle. Remember they blinded him? Who was that? Was that Michael Hayes?
Michael Hayes, and they did the dog collar cage match, and Dog has the goggles, so he wrestles the match blind, you know, and triumphs in an amazing fashion.
Now it sounds awful, but it was great.
Oh, it was fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
They made it work. You think about the creativity that goes into something like that, which goes to show you if you know you're looking at a Dave Meltzer scale of that match, you know what I mean? It's probably not going to rank very high. On feeling alone, that's a 5-star match because of the emotion. It brought something out of you. You wanted to see the dog come back. Nothing beats that feeling. Nothing. I don't care how many moves you do. Nothing beats that kind of pro wrestling.
I don't refer to a star ratings with matches, and I'll tell you why. I still consider the Hogan-Andre match one of the top 5 matches of all time, and it was a 100%. Bad match, but it was a cultural phenomenon, and people cared about it.
Yeah.
So they could have stood there and stared at each other for another 10 minutes. People were into it. It was a very big deal, and some things transcend all the flipping.
Yeah.
You know, I don't care about the technical aspect or athleticism. Same. You know, it worked.
It worked tremendously. And you had, I mean, think about that, right? You had people believing that Hulk and Andre had never wrestled before.
Right.
You know what I mean? Even though the hardcore fans knew, but it was still new. There was something about it. This Hogan and this Andre have never wrestled. You know what I mean?
Then again, they had, you know, well, they did that bit for a while. Well, Andre's never been slammed, and people came up with about 40 videotapes, you know.
Yeah. Of Andre, Stan Hansen and Harley Race.
Stan Hansen, Harley Race, Sky Lolo, you name it, they all slammed it. And it's like, gee, really? Is that really what happened? I don't know. But, you know, that's wrestling. They rewrite history for their own.
But it worked, right? You know, 90,000 people or whatever it was, you know, and countless. I mean, it's likely the most famous modern pro wrestling match in history. Maybe the most important, you know.
True. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about the stars of Mid-South and the UWF. I'm going to start with the name. I think this is really where his career took off, is Jim Ross, to be honest with you.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he'd worked other places, but this was his break. And when the sale took place, you know, when they eventually sold to Crockett, I believe that's when he kind of slowly segued into that scene on TBS, and that helped him gain traction. Again, there's no greatest anything, but there was Jerry Jaffe told me, he says, I don't like to use the term the greatest or anything, but there was nobody better than, and for a long time there was nobody better than Jim Ross.
Yeah, Jim Ross just understood when to be big in big moments, understood when to tell a story with his voice. You know, he had some good teachers. You know, he was around some good wrestling minds. You know, Bill Watts and others. You know, but Jim Ross, I think made his start there 82. I know he had been with the territory since about 74, 75 as a ref and in other roles. But, you know, and I always liked him. You know what I liked? Jim Ross, I thought he had great chemistry with Michael Hayes when they did the UWF together. You know, Michael Hayes, you know, to me doesn't get the credit as a talker. You know, he was a great commentary guy, though, with Jim Ross, and they together played off each other so well. You know, but Jim Ross, really, I mean, made his name, you know, in Mid-South and became a household name once he got to TBS. But yeah, nothing beats to me a young JR, you know?
Right. And, you know, people don't remember this a lot, but I think Watts was still working at this point, wasn't he?
He was still working to a degree, yeah. So he wasn't wrestling as much, but when he would come back, I mean, that last Stampede he did, right, with Stagger Lee and Jim Cornette in the Midnight Express. I mean, this is where Jim Cornette started to become a household name. That feud, you know, with Watts and Cornette, where they put Cornette in the diaper, you know, and all that. I mean, some of Jim Cornette's finest work was his earliest, and just a great antagonist. And Watts was that good fiery cowboy, come to ride one last time. So yeah, Bill I feel like he'd do a couple of matches a year. You know, he'd come out of retirement every now and again. But even Bill Watts, you know, he had a knack for really building, when he commentated the shows, for really building those big moments. And he also had a knack for burying guys when they territory. Paul Orndorff leaves the territory, I want to say in 82. And says, Paul went to Georgia. The talent's not as great in Georgia. This is where the best, this is where the toughest wrestle in Mid-South and there were times too. Oh, go ahead, Bob. Yeah.
But, you say buried, but you know what? I don't think anybody got buried in that, time frame. Today, they would look at it that way because everybody's a mental midget. But, because, it's, if you listen, I shouldn't use that term, but if today's internet intelligentsia about wrestling has me on my last rope. I mean, it
they
bothers
deserve
me.
This.
No, it's, they buried this one and this guy. Everybody's booking it home. You're not a booker. You're not the show, people.
Yeah.
You don't know more than the longtime promoters do.
I agree.
But in any event, when somebody left the territory, and they would gladly do some losses on the way out. It was the way it was done back then.
Yep. And I think, you take a look, right, especially with the national expansion. Case in point, guys were just, Vince was saying, hey, leave, don't drop the belt on the way out, and so, that causes some hurt feelings, and you know what I mean? And Watts was no stranger to get in front of that camera and saying, yep, this is what it is, but this was their livelihood. This was everything. So I agree with you. Bury's the wrong choice of words. I think it's more just, hey, listen, this is a real deal for us. Dog not showing for his events is not okay,
The best wrestling promotions are myopic. Forget what everybody else is doing. Do your own thing.
Yeah.
Don't refer to some other organization or drop hints that somebody else, or even that they left. I mean, I was such a territory guy. Even, I grew up on WWF and people would leave. It happened all the time. Nobody got buried.
Yeah.
Like Greg Valentine would do a couple of years, then go off and go somewhere else and come back within 3 years.
With a new,
that's the way it worked. It kept everybody fresh.
Yeah. And I think too, like you said, most guys would, drop a title on the way out of the territory or, put the next guy over. And again, it was just about building to the next thing, going on to your next place. It was just a natural progression of things, but I think, like I said, when, case in point, like I said, I think Watts tended to take some of those things a little personally. And maybe when a guy didn't leave on the best terms, it made it on air.
Well, Ted DiBiase was a big star in that region.
Yes.
And right before, and where was he before that? The WWF. And I just looked 2 days ago at a match results sheet, and he got pinned by Bulldog Brower on the way out the door.
Yeah.
Brower's about 96 years old. I'm not putting down Bulldog Brower. He's one of my old favorites. He really is. But it doesn't even sound right on paper, but you know what? That's what you did back then.
That's what you did. It was doing business the right way. Ted DiBiase is another great guy who you look at and everybody, go, oh, the $1 Million Man. And he was so much more than the $1 Million Man. That loaded glove.
He was a very complicated figure in UWF / Mid-South. He could be a heel, he could be a face, but he learned to scheme. Is that the good way to put it back then?
That's a great way to put it.
He got a harder edge for the first time. He was strict baby face in the WWF.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden he had a plan, but he wasn't going to let you know what it was.
Oh, yeah. Well, the the match where they have the friendly match, right? JYD and Ted DiBiase for the North American belt, and DiBiase loads the glove and knocks Dog out, and they tell the story how Dog was, the best man in his wedding and all this, and Ted, oh boy, and Dog was going to come for him, and but again, those things they would pull your heartstrings. They would make you feel something. You would feel cheated. How could he do that? They were great friends. It was supposed to be a scientific match, right? Scientific, you don't hear that term anymore, right? The good guys were scientific wrestlers.
You heard it in my magazines in every edition. Yeah, we used fan favorite was a big thing we used. We used scientific wrestler.
Yeah.
Rule breaker was big in ours.
Yeah, rule breaker was.
We didn't use heels and faces.
No.
We didn't. And you know what? It was better then, damn it. Yeah. It was better then. You didn't need to know every inside of time back then.
No.
And I really do believe that. I'm sorry.
I do too.
The door's been flung open too wide.
But it's why, and I think, you look back at this era, wrestling, and it's why it reaches still. When I watch, Watts was really good at, those big schmazzes. So it was good, like, say, you have Akbar and the one-man gang in the ring, they're beating up on, Hacksaw Duggan, and then here comes DiBiase and Steve Williams, and then here comes the Freebirds, and it was just wild, but it's why those things resonate when you watch them now, because it takes you back to that feeling, and we got to go, we're out of time, we'll see you next week. It was fantastic.
Right. They were famous for that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
For people who may not have seen Mid-South or the UWF, the only thing I can think of to try to describe the action and the feel, I think it was like a merger of three different other places. If for the fans who haven't seen it, it was kind of like World Class. It was kind of like the NWA.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like Memphis.
Yeah.
It had a hard edge to it as far as the action went.
Yeah.
And when they got going, I mean, there were so many guys there who could really go. And some of the matches could be long. The feuds were always raging hot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
oh, yeah.
My gosh. The Akbar bunch, the Freebirds, you name it.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and they did a lot of shows in Houston with Paul Bosch. There was that connection there. So, you wrestled down in that era, you had to be tough.
You know what I found kind of interesting about it, though? It wasn't the bloodiest organization at all.
No, it wasn't.
There was blood, but it wasn't used nearly as much as the NWA was using at that point.
No, God, no. Well, and
I mean, Starrcade, the first Starrcade was a bloodbath.
Oh my God.
There was like 6 bloody matches on that card.
And even Angelo Mosca, the referee, is getting cut open.
Yeah, I mean, come on. I think the fans were, you get a complimentary gig job on the way in.
Poor Barbara.
But seriously,
Larry was even.
Oh no, don't go there. But have you ever seen a bloodier overall card than that? I mean, even ECW cards weren't that bloody.
No, that was a. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, and I said this. I was watching recently some old Southwest tape. I said, my God, is there a match where Manny Fernandez doesn't bleed? And I don't think I can think of one.
But Southwest, isn't it legendary now that a very gory Eric Embry got them thrown off?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they were thrown off or if Vince just snuck in at that point, but all of a sudden Southwest was off and here comes Vince McMahon.
Here comes Vince. So, he took advantage. Yeah.
That's how he got on USA Network for the first time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, people forget, Southwest Championship Wrestling was the first wrestling, or at least the first regular show. I know they did some shows, on USA Network, before that, but
I hate to say it though. You went from Eric Embry and Bob Sweetan to Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant. There was a difference.
Oh, it was
sort of a difference.
It was a big difference.
Yeah. Listen, we're talking about, but let's get back to the UWF and Mid-South, whatever you want to call it. Name your favorite stars and your favorite moments. You seem to be really up on this stuff, so let's let you go.
I loved the Freebirds coming in multiple runs. I thought they were great. I think Terry Gordy being the UWF champion was dynamite. Loved seeing him getting a run there. And I just thought the Freebirds were a hot act at that time, and they were just, it was instant heat. You had the Freebirds embroiled in something, instant heat. It was great. Dr. Det, Steve Williams, Ted DiBiase, a great team. And individual single stars as well, to where Steve Williams really, came into his own. And at first, like I said, wasn't celebrated, because he was seen as Watts' boy and he was only getting pushed because he went to OU. And then he really picked up and became a dynamite wrestler, and one of the hardest hitting wrestlers ever. And Doc had a hell of a personality as well, which I think, really fit that era really well. And two, some underappreciated guys. You remember a guy by the name of Savannah Jack?
Sure.
Savannah Jack with the super kick, he was a TV champion in the UWF. Again, really underappreciated guy, but, he had a great look and, he was fun. They really took, when they became the UWF, they really took a lot of the world-class stars with them. I remember Sunshine coming over and the Freebirds, and Chris Adams came over, and, Iceman, King Parsons. who I always loved, Iceman King Parsons. I just thought he was great. Anywhere he was, I loved Iceman Parsons.
He was the first one to say, "You Rudy Poot."
You Rudy Poot, right? But a young guy who got a start there and became an icon is Sting.
That's right. Yeah.
Sting really was given a chance, and you see very young, very green, but he really starts to get into some of the colors with the face paint and starts to develop this persona. With Eddie Gilbert, I think, being in the Hot Stuff International there, right? Eddie Gilbert, was great for him. The first platform that he ever really, had under him, that was really, that gave Sting some credibility, so I thought that was great. So yeah, lots of great guys. So the Fantastics were wonderful. What a phenomenal tag team. Tommy Rogers, who's, unfortunately no longer with us. Tommy Rogers threw a tremendous drop kick. Bobby Fulton, you know what I mean? They just ignited the crowd. They'd come out to ZZ Top's Sharp Dressed Man, and it was just great. They were fantastic.
Now, that's the organization where Hacksaw Duggan got his first real push, right?
Yeah. And this was before the WWF kind of dumbed him down a little bit,
No, everything in WWF was diet, whoever it was.
Yeah.
It's like, because the original Duggan was really a tough guy.
Oh yeah. Yep. And he was rough and tumble and battled guys like Kamala and the One Man Gang. And boy, man, Duggan was good. Another guy, like I said, who is more remembered for, his mainstream gimmick, but man, was he good. Man, was Jim Duggan good.
Between 81 and 82, he was still in his hometown area. He's from Glens Falls, New York. He was working WWF and doing jobs on TV.
Yeah.
I was so happy to see him as Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
Yeah.
Moving up the ladder somewhere, because he was always a massively big, strong guy.
Yeah.
And to see him just grow his hair out, grow a beard, and get a personality. Yeah. Bingo, jackpot.
Oh, yeah.
That's Bill Watts for you.
Yeah. And again, Duggan fit that mold. You know what I mean? That rough tumble. But again, all those guys had some kind of personality. I think you nailed it there. That they really could hold on to something and could talk and could get a point across. But man, they were not to be messed with. And speaking of hacksaws, another great hacksaw, Butch Reed. Boy, was he good. And I think appreciated more now, since his passing. But man, could Butch Reed go, and was he strong? My goodness, him and Buddy Landell. I like that little team for a while. They were there, but even Landell, got really his character and his gimmick really started in Mid-South.
I want to give Hacksaw Butch Reed a little bit of a plaudit, because I think he was vastly underrated on the stick. I think he could talk.
Yeah.
Very realistically. He didn't sound like he was reading from a script. He sounded like he was coming from in here, pointing at my heart.
Oh, yeah.
And he was really a realistic wrestler.
He was. Yeah. I mean, rough and tumble, and he was believable. He was very believable.
Right. Right.
And that's what made guys like that great, and again, he was another guy that fit that mold, of what Mid-South was, and I would have loved to have seen him. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened had he not gone to New York in '86 or whatever that was, and not become the Natural. Obviously, listen, you can't blame the guy for taking that kind of payday, and they were going to be willing to pay you. I'm sure you would have done anything that they wanted. But you know who?
Well, this.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
The sheep herders became the bushwhackers, and I think it was the best thing that ever happened to those two guys personally, because they didn't have to go through those hellacious blood fests anymore.
Yeah.
They could just, be a comedy act, but it worked.
It did work.
The last two guys I ever thought would be faces, not only faces, kids characters.
Yeah. They were unbelievable.
But 6 months before that, they were like, in blood math. Yeah, it's crazy.
And yeah, you can't blame them. Like I said, they extended their career, another 10, 15 years with that gimmick.
Yeah, you listen to Luke talk now, it's like the greatest gift they ever got, because they could work a little less hard. The matches were usually mid-card comedy matches.
Yeah.
They were never really serious contenders to the title in the WWF,
No.
but they were having fun, and the fans were having fun watching them. So yeah, comedy vignettes with Gene Okerlund having a 7-Up. I remember
Oh,
it was just
so good.
just silly stuff. So now let's talk about the UWF concept.
Yeah.
Somehow they said let's kind of sort of go national.
Yeah.
And before a year was done, the whole concept was gone.
Yeah.
What went wrong?
I think Watts was bleeding money. I don't think he could afford to pay. I think he was being pushed out by, the prices of everything. I think that, he had a great thing for his area, but it was just that it was still a territory, UWF, where they run shows, Oklahoma, Texas, there
was a bad recession, 86, 87.
Yeah.
I mean, it was eating up that whole region. Forget wrestling. Regular walking around people were having a hard time.
Yeah. Well,
and when you couldn't afford gas to put in your car, you weren't going to buy wrestling tickets.
No, and I think too, you had the fact that wrestling was changing so much, and it was becoming these big glitz, and you didn't have the access to talent that you did years before. Guys were getting scooped up. Everybody was getting scooped up, and so I think that was part of it. I think because take a look, what real options did they have other than staying a regional wrestling office, right? They couldn't team up to go against Vince because nobody would trust each other. They tried that and it failed, right? Pro Wrestling USA was some initial success, but, there was no trust amongst. It was eventually going to come down to my guy's going to go over, and that's going to be, the proof in the pudding.
It was totally disjointed. I was rooting for Pro Wrestling USA, and it was so disjointed.
Yeah.
It started out as a nice hybrid, then and then the announcers changed. The next thing you know, it's an all NWA show, and the AWA disappeared.
Yeah,
and it was a mess.
Yeah, and so I think guys decided they were going to go up against Vince, and I just don't think they had the resources. They weren't going to outdo what Vince McMahon was trying to do. And I really think that was it. It was just the lack of resources. It was the lack of, big talent, like I said, was getting scooped up, and that was that. You were left with not much to work with.
But you might find this funny. I remember the very first in the New York market Pro Wrestling USA shows that they showed.
Yeah.
And you know who the announcing team was? Jack Reynolds and Terry Funk.
Yeah.
Now you can't even imagine that. Yeah. Now, before you know it, Jack Reynolds disappears from the show and he's suddenly appearing on WWF programming.
Yep.
Ka-ching.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, right? Even you take a look, right? They did, what was that Super Clash, the AWA, that joint show in Comiskey Park. And you got people going, well, David Crockett's talking to my talent and trying to get him, And
here's the problem. If you have that level of distrust, don't join up with anybody else.
Yeah.
But, although I thought Super Clash 2 drew pretty well, as I recall, moderately well.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the bust that Super Clash 3 was, the complete debacle that was.
No.
But anyway, back to the UWF. So anyway, they try this and they import some world-class folks and it's just, I think it got watered down and the edge got taken off and the regional feel got taken off a little bit when they tried to go national, and it just kind of fizzled out. And he ended up selling to Crockett, as I recall, right?
It was a great show until I want to say maybe, April 87, May 87, maybe I would say until about New Year's 87. And then it started to water down and it started to kind of, the sale to Crockett, and you had guys leaving, number one, so you didn't have the same talent. Number two, you went from Ted DiBiase and the Freebirds to now the Angel of Death. And, you know what I mean? Like, it was not, the talent was leaving. And you still had some good young guys, you know what I mean? Like I said, you had Sting, you had Terry Taylor, but Terry Taylor wasn't going to be a top guy. You had a very young Shane Douglas, you had Eddie Gilbert, but none of those guys were going to be those big arena draws. They were regional guys. And Sting hadn't become what he became yet. And the NWA, and this is what I find disappointing about promoters, is that I think they really could have done something with a UWF NWA I don't want to say a split, but almost like an angle where they really, to me, tried to dumb down the UWF and it became an NWA light television show, with mid-card guys and things like that. The occasional main event match, but, to me, it just became another NWA show at that point.
Well, they always had Mike Boyette, though.
They did.
Remember the hippie Mike Boyette, right?
Hippie Mike Boyette. He
seemed to be on every show. In fact, I remember watching, I think this was a UWF show I was watching at the time when it was new, and I think he suffered a really bad injury in one match. Yeah. I think I think it was against Sam Houston, and forgive me if I'm wrong about this, but he's wrestling, and all of a sudden he collapses to the mat and his arms went limp, and he was just laying there.
And it just I think they stopped
and
the match.
I knew it was real because they stopped the match, and then medical people came into the ring right then and there. I don't know what happened to him. I think it was some kind of a pinched nerve or something that got him. But it was still debilitating, and they had to stop the match. So.
Oh, yeah.
But Boyette was a regular, though. He
was, yeah. And have his record right. He was like 103 or something like that. And
they were making fun of it, too. I remember that.
Yeah. But
now, do you remember PWI getting involved with the UWF?
The UWF Cup, yes. And
that's right.
86, right? Things were still good.
One of the great PWI covers. I mean, like 6 people grasping the trophy. That's a classic. That's a classic.
One of my favorites.
But I think the way the tournament itself was handled, wasn't it over the course of many weeks on television or something like that? It wasn't really just one tournament.
Yeah.
I know that Steve Williams ended up with it December 20, 1986. I have.
Yeah.
And he defeated One Man Gang.
So that's kind of the beginning of the end, right? So Gang, not long after that, loses to Big Bubba Rogers, who then loses to Steve Williams. But that was kind of the beginning of the end, because DiBiase is gone not long after that. They brought in John Ayers. You remember they brought in John Ayers as the commissioner, former football player. And then he passed away not that long after that. He had terrible cancer, so, and he was just bland, big guy, tall guy, he was like 6'7" or 6'8", he was huge. But it just, I don't know. It just didn't ring to me, it didn't anything, but like I said, it was basically an NWA light show, by early to mid 87. And they kept it going till December 87, right? When they finally pulled the plug on
something like that.
Arcade, but even right, they have this UWF title match at Starrcade 87, Barry Windham and Steve Dr. Death Williams. It was just like a throwaway match, it started featuring the Western States title a whole lot more.
It's the Western States Heritage Championship, which sounded like something you'd hear in the craft food on the craft music hall.
Yeah.
Right. Western States Heritage Cheese Log. It just I never understood even the point of reference of the Western States Heritage. Do you?
No.
They didn't know the belt for what reason? It was Larry Zbyszko had it for a while. Barry Windham had it. You name it.
Yeah.
So.
Nice looking title, but that was it. Yeah, and it's funny because again, I think. To me, Bill Watts had such a great wrestling mind, and to me, I would have taken advantage of that. I would have brought that in.
Well, this is the point I want to make about why we're talking about this. At its best, there was no more exciting wrestling organization than Mid-South / UWF. When it was 100%. Good, it was great. Am I right about that?
100%. It was appointment television. I mean, you watch that, and again, you have the commentary of Jim Ross and Michael Hayes, or you know what I mean. Hell, you even had Watts' kid, right? Joel Watts doing commentary. You know
what? He was so straight laced. He was good.
Yeah, because he wasn't bad.
No, he was sports. It looked like a sport. He looked like a guy covering lacrosse or something, but that made it look real.
Oh yeah. Well, even him, right? Boyd Pierce. Remember Boyd Pierce?
Oh, with those. I love him.
I loved Boyd Pierce with those suits, and there was an angle somebody showed recently. I guess it was like one of those recent on this dates in like 1985 or something. And again, you probably couldn't do this angle now, but then Terry Taylor was fighting Adrian Street for the Mid-South television title medallion. They had a medallion instead of a belt. Street kisses him in the middle of the ring, and Taylor is, rubbing it off, and Adrian rolls him up as he's distracted and wins the medallion. So they show next week, and Boyd Pierce is disgusted. He's going, Adrian, you basically kissed the title off another man. He goes, this is the sport of kings, a sport of men. What do you have to say for yourself? And Adrian, without even thinking, goes, England is run by a queen, my dear.
Wow.
That's so straight-laced. Boyd has nothing,
I met Boyd Pierce at some NWA event, right? I don't even know why he was there. And I had seen his work, so Bill Apter introduced me like he introduced me to. I said, boy, Mr. Pierce, I've enjoyed your work for years. And he said something akin to this. I'm paraphrasing. Well, I'm glad you said that because I got a face for radio and a voice for cow calling. And I'm like, all right. Self-depreciating. But you know what? He was a very friendly, old school gentleman. And
they wore those suits.
Those wild suits. They don't make them like that anymore.
No, Boyd Pierce is a lost treasure in pro wrestling. But he traveled quite a bit. He was at home there with Mid-South, McGurk, and Tri-States and all that. But he did work in Texas, World Class, and Houston, and a couple of different places. He was, he got around, and again, even the old ring announcer, Reeser Bowden. You remember Reeser Bowden?
Sure.
Mid-South, that very straight-laced, but it worked. Good old Reeser. There's I forget who it is. I want to say it might be Scott Irwin, Super Destroyer, and they're in front of the Mid-South wrestling, background, and he gets real excited. Irwin does, and he kicks, and the stool comes right out from under poor Reeser, and he goes flat on his rear end.
I want to, since you've been into this organization lately, will you tell our listeners the best places to go to watch the UWF and Mid-South?
There's a lot of great stuff on Peacock, mostly if you want to see the Mid-South stuff in chronological order, they have the episodes complete and full. It's a great place. It's a little bit different, because they dub the music and they, take away some of the edge with the entrance music and different things that you could experience at the time. But YouTube, if you want UWF, YouTube is a great place to find old UWF tapes. And two, if you want to see some of that real good arena action too, it's a great place. YouTube is where I go for UWF, Peacock for Mid-South. So really, really great stuff. It's accessible. Thank God, like I said, for digital media. That's one of the great things about today, is we have all this footage at our fingertips, and we're just, as we go forth, we're losing lots of guys and gals from that era, and so let's keep it alive. Let's keep that footage alive, and, keep those memories alive and pass it down to the generations for hopefully wrestling fans to enjoy for a whole lot, many more generations.
Well, as a public service announcement, I do want to state to our listeners, in case you're a young'un and you don't know specifically what we're talking about, and you go on to your favorite YouTubes or wherever you go, and you see UWF, please do not confuse the Bill Watts UWF with Herb Abrams UWF from 1990. They are two entirely different animals. Now, you may ask, how was Herb Abrams allowed to call it the UWF? Well, first of all, I don't think he knew what he was doing. I don't even think he knew there was another UWF, to be honest. But secondly, I don't think Watts ever controlled that
trademark
moniker or trademarked it. So if something isn't trademarked, if I want to call myself Mike Leotis, he's not trademarked, so I can walk around and do that. It's just that simple. There was a big thing now in the music world. There's a big thing in the music world where one of the lesser members of the Guess Who trademarked the name after the band broke up.
Yeah.
And then he owned it and was able to tour with a bunch of, fake players. So, but if you have anything of value, folks out there, trademark it.
Yeah.
Seriously, I'm not being facetious. You need to trademark anything that's a business entity that is making money and being successful. In fact, trademark it before it becomes successful, because you never know.
Well, and I think too, there's one thing I would be remiss if I didn't mention here: the great tag teams of the UWF and Mid-South Wrestling. Where the Midnight Express and Rock and Roll Express got it on. and tore it down every arena in that region. Mid-South is where that rivalry lit on fire. And if you want to see the best tag team wrestling in the world, I highly suggest you watch any Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express match from Mid-South, and you will thank us for steering you in that direction.
Yeah. How great were the 80s tag teams? The more I think about it, I think
so
that was
good.
the ultimate of tag team action was the 1980s, really.
Yeah.
All the way from the teams we're talking about to the late 80s and the NWA, those great teams. I always think of the WWE as being watered down versions of teams.
Yeah.
Like they had Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda, and I know they just went in the WWE Hall of Fame, but is that an all-time great tag team? I don't know that.
Yeah.
Because it's not their fault. It was the style then and the opponents that they had.
Yeah, they worked with what they had,
What was it? Greg Valentine and Brutus Beefcake or something?
I liked the Dream Team. I thought they were pretty good.
You did like that.
I'm even a Demolition guy. I like Demolition,
Demolition, you know what? You make a great point. Demolition earned their stripes.
Yeah. They went from being road warriors seen as copies. And Demolition really went out there and did something that was a little bit different,
They did.
That I thought was, and two great wrestlers, right? Barry Darsow and Bill Eadie, were fantastic.
What they did was impossible. They gained traction and never let it go as long as they were Demolition. I still, to this day, don't know why they brought a third one in, but that's the way they did things.
Oh, and they had that great theme song, too.
Rick Derringer, right?
Rick Derringer, fantastic.
Yeah. Because I can't sing it, I'll get sued. All right. But no, the 80s to me was the great tag teams. They really were. Unless you go back to, Antonio Rocca. And,
But I think, Bob, we have the subject for our next time we get together.
Well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a show about the greatest promo men. I hate to use the word promo. Maybe I just call it the greatest interview subjects of all time. The people who could talk you into the building. Mm. And I haven't done that yet. And thanks to you, I've come up with that concept. So
hey, I'm here to
jog my brain, buddy. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's always great to be here. This is one of my favorite things. To me, this is the best podcast out there. And I truly mean that. Getting to know you and become friends with you, Bob, has been something that I truly do treasure. So thank you again.
What's really cool? I just got back from Albany going to the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, International Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame ceremony this past weekend. And I will say this. I have made more friends in the last 2 years since starting this thing. I mean, legitimate friends. I mean, it's scary.
Yeah.
And I am sorry I walked away from this stuff back in the 90s. I just, I got fed up.
Yeah.
Financially and everything else, and things were not going well. And I didn't need the break. I just felt that there was no place left to go. And it bothered me because I busted my ass at PWI. I thought it was, we made good magazines and things were changing. The sheets were taken over. Yeah. Newsstand magazines of all kinds were starting to go down in circulation. It got harder and harder and harder to do. So even to this day, what's a wrestling magazine? You have PWI and that's it. Yeah. So I never dreamed that would happen. I used to manage a record store. I never dreamed there wouldn't be records anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
I used to be a newspaper editor. I wouldn't dream that newspapers would become passé.
Yeah.
And now I can't even find a wooden leg for this leg. So what can I do? I'm just kidding. But you know what I'm saying? It's like the things that I grew up with that I treasured are no longer with us.
Yeah.
It's a sign of the times. But I like cell phones, so it's a trade-off.
Yeah. Right.
But no, in all seriousness, so I'm glad I took the 35-year hiatus because when I came back, I learned two things. Number one, I met people like you who actually knew who I was from the day, which still flabbergasts me. I was in Albany and somebody walked up to me at the they had a meet and greet event. Yeah. Kid walked up. He goes, "I love your show, and I knew who you were. I used to read all the magazines."
Oh, that's awesome.
You look like you're 17. Yeah. So that's the stuff. So when you get an affirmation, when people kind of say your work had value, I enjoyed it. To me, that's worth more than money. I don't care if I'm in the top 20 ever as a podcaster.
Yeah.
I'm doing this to show my appreciation for the stuff I grew up watching. This is the same way like the Hall of Fame does the same thing. It's like we're just appreciating the stuff that we thought was great.
Yeah. 100%.
And obviously the Mid-South, the Mid-South and the early part of the UWF, they were great too. And they deserved their day in the sun here on the show. That's for sure.
Agreed. Yeah. Great times and, great things to look back on and still to enjoy, and, everybody can enjoy, what they want to enjoy. And that's the great thing about life, and, it's nice to have people to enjoy things with. Listen, I get a charge today when, my 8-year-old loves seeing Cody Rhodes come out, and then we do the entrance and we do the whole thing. It's great for me, but man, I love
he really does have.
Yeah.
Cody really does have a hold on the kids, doesn't he?
It's crazy.
Why do you think let me ask you a professional opinion.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Why do kids like Cody Rhodes?
I think he just looks like an all-American superhero. I think, I think the song is relatable. I think it's interactive. I think he's very family friendly. So I don't know what particularly the hold is, but I just think there's something very approachable about Cody Rhodes, more so than any other star I can think of in the last X amount of years, maybe John Cena, to that level. I feel like you could approach Cody Rhodes, in a thing, and it's real. There's a genuineness there. But like I said, the colors, everything, maybe the dog, I don't know, but that entrance comes on and she wants to see it. She could care less about the match once it starts, as long as Cody wins. But she sees that entrance and she does the whole deal. But I say that to say it's the same feeling I used to get with my dad watching wrestling. It's great. And it's the same thing I know, like I said, my cohort, Scotty Richardson, same feeling he used to get watching Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling on Saturdays. So for people to be able to enjoy, and for me, like I said, being, about 10 years younger than Scotty, enjoying some of these things for the first time that I only read about and researched as a kid up until now it's becoming real for me. And it's pretty incredible. So seeing it almost through the eyes of a first timer.
Okay. Which reminds me of Family Bacon Wrestling. Did I have that in order? And that was Scotty's first book. Now, I need for you to tell the people how to get a hold of Wrestler Weekly and tell us how close it is to the release of Scotty's new book.
So Wrestler Weekly, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at Wrestler Weekly. You can interact with us right on there. We love talking to folks. And so they're also on YouTube as well. We have lots of different shows that we've done there. And so you can grab us there. Like I said, come say hello. We're happy to talk to everybody, and just talk about the wrestling that you love. And then Family Bacon Wrestling, you can get that right on Amazon, Family Bacon Wrestling at Scotty Richardson, by Scotty Richardson. You get that right on Amazon. We also have t-shirts available, so you can get those as well. And then too, book number 2, Belt versus Belt, the most important wrestling match of our time, Harley Race versus superstar Billy Graham, the Super Bowl of wrestling in, I believe, 1977 or 78, is going to be coming out hopefully right at the start of the new year. So I wrote the foreword for the book, what did I write? The preface. I wrote the preface for the book. And Scotty authors this, and it is a trip back in time to not what was happening with this match, but what was happening in culture at that time. And it also takes a look at other famous world champion versus world champion matches in wrestling history. And it's going to be a great read. It's going to be an easy read. If you pick up Family Bacon Wrestling, you'll see that it is wrestling through a wrestling fan's view. It is incredible. And so Amazon is where you can find that book. But yeah, January 2025 is what it looks like we're looking at for Belt versus Belt.
Nice. I've been waiting on this one, as you know. So it's like, Scotty, he kind of clued me into what he was up to. And I think it's a great topic because, I'll bet there's a lot of younger people who don't even know about that match or that era. No. And this will help them understand it a little better.
Yeah. It's a unique look into it. And I think, too, when there's some insights from Harley Race himself, Scotty was able to interview Harley before he passed, which was really, really cool. So there's going to be some insights from the man himself, Harley Race. I think that's going to be fun to kind of hear about that. Scotty's a tremendous wrestling historian, a true wrestling historian, just one of the best guys out there. So,
I just met Justin Race, Harley's son, and his wife, Harley's wife. They were at the Hall of Fame accepting. Harley Race was inducted in the Hall of Fame. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Justin has so many anecdotes about his dad.
That's awesome.
I talked to him, just me and him, and Kayla Sparks, who's a female wrestler. We're just standing at a table, and he comes over and starts talking to us. We start talking about Harley, and for about a half an hour, we just talked about Harley's career, and it's one of my great moments in wrestling.
Oh, that's
seriously, to have somebody who was that intimate with him.
Yeah.
Just talking about his accomplishments and what the home life was, and fascinating guy. And I can tell you that I think that Justin is working on a book himself.
Okay, great.
And
that would be
I think everybody's going to look forward to that. That's going to be excellent. Excellent.
Awesome.
And speaking of excellent, this is Mike Leotis, one of the most excellent people I have met since starting this journey. I hate that expression. Aren't you sick of that?
Yeah.
I'm starting my podcasting journey. I'm starting my journey as a submarine sandwich maker at Subway. What? Yeah. Is everything a journey? The only journey I know, it's Steve Perry in it.
That's the best kind of journey. And Dark Journey.
There you go.
Dark Journey.
Dark Journey was great, wasn't she?
She was great. She was feisty, and she didn't care about getting involved in matches. I loved it.
She's everything a valet should have been in the 80s.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. Baby Doll, too. Baby Doll was great.
Yeah. Great valet.
Baby Doll would flip back and forth, though. Baby Doll flipped back and forth. Face heel, face heel, face heel.
Yeah.
But, it just meant she was cunning. Those cunning valets. Sunshine, cunning valet.
Oh,
Precious, cunning valet.
That was my first crush with Sunshine.
Missy Hyatt.
Missy Hyatt was fantastic.
Yeah, Missy Hyatt. Oh, cunning. Oh.
Yeah.
The only one who wasn't cunning was Elizabeth, who became cunning when she went to WCW.
Yeah.
It's like, did you ever think you'd see a heel Elizabeth? No.
No, and I didn't like it at all. It was, the bloom was off the rose for me at that point.
That's the way the organization crumbles. Hey,
yes.
All right. I'm going to go. This is Mike Leotis. He is one of my favorite people today, and I cannot thank you enough for coming back here, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Bob. It was a great time.
Always an absolute gas when I have Mike Leotis around here, and I hope you agree. He's a wonderful guy. Really loves his wrestling and respects the old school wrestling the same way I do. You got it like that, if you're our ages, that is. Anyway, there's been so much going on, and I want to apologize in a way. Seriously, I've become a little forgetful about some facts and figures and things like this. I am so busy. I had a period where I had COVID for 10 days, and then I had some time off that I really needed to take just to clear my head. And a few things slipped through the cracks. So if I haven't gotten back to a few of you, I'm going to concentrate a little better and get back to a bunch of you real soon, okay? So if you wrote to me about this or that or the other thing, I will get back to you. I'm doing the 2 podcasts now. I'm trying to keep the quality up on these presentations, particularly now that I'm with a podcast network, and I want to make that network happy, and I want to make myself happy, because I'm firmly of the belief that good podcasts, you got to please yourself and hope that other people like it, rather than mold your podcast to a teeming mass that doesn't really exist. A little heady, I know. In other words, I want to be original, I want to be different, and I hope that you like what you hear. I want to mention, we put our usual ad in for the WrestleCopia Podcast Network at the beginning of the show, but one of the shows has changed. The Doug Gilbert podcast now has a permanent co-host in Wildfire Tommy Rich. Every episode. How do you like that? That's going to be really ginchy. So tune into that and all the other shows on the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. There's some really good stuff on this network, and I hope that you partake, because I know that I do. Some of my favorites, like Dave Dynasty and stuff like that, are on there. And of course, Ray Russell's shows. It's just, I'm having so much fun with them. And one more thing for me to do. See, I have to kind of put the podcast out. My podcast now gets put out on my own, and then I have to feed it to the network as well, and hope everything works out properly. But there you have it. I'm also a proud member of WFIA, That's Wrestling Fans International Association. It's back. Brad Drake is involved with that, and a bunch of really good board members. WFIA.org. Check that out, too. I've been remiss about mentioning them. I have been running Brad's ad for a while here, and I'm doing that on my dime because you know what? It's time we all get together a little more often. You know, we got to keep this traditional spirit of pro wrestling alive. I think it's important. There's an education in all this. There's history in all this. Can't let it droop and drop. Is that an expression? OutdatedWrestlingHour.buzzsprout.com. That is our website where you can hear every single episode of this show. Click a button, it's right there. And it'll also tell you the unbelievable amount of podcast apps that we're on. And that's not even the complete list. But if you really want to find out where to listen to it, maybe you'll find your favorite podcast app listed. You should, because most of them are there. Check that out. I'd also like for you to check out the Outdated Entertainment Hour, our sister podcast. The current episode, we're looking at toys. Toys. The stuff we all played with. From Operation Games to Yo-Yos to Hot Wheels to Give Us Your Protectors by Kenner. It's a really good show with a really good guest, and see generally from the Stick to Wrestling podcast, from the Arcadian Vanguard Network with the great John McAdam. And those two guys are coming back to that show to do something really special really soon, to the Entertainment Hour. In fact, I think it'll be McAdam's first non-wrestling podcast, maybe, something like that. Love those guys. Love the Arcadian Vanguard Network. You know what? I'm a community man. I don't have no caste system. If I like it, I'm going to hype it. I don't care who you're with or what company it is. If it's good, I want everybody to go and enjoy it. So there you go. Write to us at outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Write to me there for wrestling-related fun stuff that doesn't have to do with anything serious. If you want to talk about some old school stuff, please do it there. Business associates and comrades who in the wrestling business, please write to me at Facebook. I'm Bob Smith. I'm the one singing with B.B. King. You can't miss it. I also have astoundingly long hair in my promo photo. The photo, I have to admit, the promo photo, it's a great photo of me. I actually look good. I don't look good very often, but I look good in this particular promo photo. And that's because the thing is about 9 years old at this point. Because now I look like a sack of sacrete. That's as best as I could say. Where else? Oh, I want to also give a shout out, and I've been remiss in doing this, to our theme song. Funky Bone, MRB. That's the artist. Find him on SoundCloud. MRB. Unbelievable funky tune. Got some other great funky tunes. Probably listen to him for free on SoundCloud. Or type MRB, Funky Bone, in, and you'll find out more about this great artist. I love the song, and I want to reiterate that I play a truncated version at the beginning of the show and the entire song at the end of the show, in case you want to hear the whole song. Most podcast fans don't. I will admit, I have it there so I can listen to the whole thing in my car. I mean it. I love that song, and I want to listen to the whole thing in my car. And I got to crank up the bass and feel the funk. That's what I like. So there you go. Am I forgetting anything else? I'm telling you, I'm starting to feel it right now. You know, I've been so busy with the two podcasts and the travel and other things that I'm starting to forget a few things. So please come back and tune in next week for what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour. We come out every Friday. The Outdated Entertainment Hour comes out every alternate Wednesday. Both of those podcasts are brought to you by Bob Smith Podcasts. And this show is available, and you need to go there, WrestleCopia.com, the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Ray Russell, thank you very much. Till next week, this is Bob Smith saying the words Ringo Starr, peace and love, brothers and sisters. I also want to quote the great Junkyard Dog, who looked at the camera and said to one of the heels, "You ain't nothing."